Saint Canard. Welcome to the Saint Canard Files, a Darkwing Duck podcast. I'm your host, Will Santana, and
I'm Mike Russo, and it looks like you need a 3/4 pinkney flange.
Hey, Mike, we got a special co-host with us today.
Yes, we do. Who's joining us tonight, Will?
Tim Partidge from the UK. Welcome, Tim.
Hi, Tim.
Hi, guys. Hi.
Hey, how's it going, man? You doing all right?
I'm great, thanks. Yourself?
Oh, man, what time is it out there in the UK right now?
It's 2 a.m., but I'm talking Darkwing Duck, so I'm great. I'm buzzing.
All right. Well, Tim reached out to us a while back. You might remember him from our roundtable flash crack that we had. He wanted this episode. Two people joined us later on, part of our Darkwing Zoom chat, and they wanted this episode. But Tim, you beat them to the punch. Why is that, man?
It's a great episode. It's a classic episode. It's prophetic in many ways. I think it resonates now maybe more than it did then, and it really instilled a sense of cynicism, I think, into a lot of people at an early age. I think anyway. I certainly felt I got that from it. It works on so many levels. It's really tightly written, really thematically tight. And it's the dialogue's incredible, and it whips along so quickly too. And Darkwing's in every scene as well. But yeah, it's, as far as I'm concerned, this is an out and out classic.
Okay, well, Tim, tell us a little bit about you, man. Like, how did you get into Darkwing and stuff like that, man?
Okay, so I actually did an interview recently with Tad Stones, which is on my website, timpartridge.info. I've been a fan ever since the show, ever since I first saw the show. In the UK, we got it a bit later than in North America. In fact, Tad Stones, the creator, was working on Aladdin when they released it in the UK. That's how late it was released. So yeah, like it's an honor and a privilege to be here tonight, because I've listened so much to your show. I've spent hours, days listening to your podcast.
Thank you.
It's lovely to just, finally find human beings to talk about this, because I recorded everything religiously. I had stacks of VHSs and I had nobody to discuss it with. So, 30 years later, here I am, and it's very exciting.
Okay. Well, guys, before we get into the episode, Mike, I wanted to have a quick discussion, really quick. Because I know people want to hear this episode, especially the Liquidator fans. This is their baby. This is their one and only shot. And, I want to give them a good one. But really quick, I wanted to discuss, do you guys consider this episode tier 1, tier 2, or even below tier 2? Mike, you go first.
Definitely not tier 1. I think the animation holds it back. I would say definitely somewhere in tier 2. It isn't one of my top 10 favorites, maybe not even top 20, but it's still really up there. I think because it depicts Liquidator so well, better than he ever would be shown again. So this episode has its strengths. It isn't a bad episode by any means. So I would say definitely around tier 2, no lower than that though.
Okay. How about you, Tim?
Well, if tier 1's the highest, then it's going to be tier 1 or higher than tier 1.
Okay. So you got tier 1. I'm a tier 1 guy also, Mike. I definitely think it's a top 10. But before you join us on Skype today or to record this, me and Tim were having that discussion. I told him I felt it was tier 1, but I could see the argument where the animation would drop it down. Didn't I say that, Tim? Remember? And that's funny that Mike mentioned the animation. So I won't debate people who say it's tier 2. I can see their argument in it, but I do feel it's a tier 1. I do love this villain. He's not my favorite villain, but he is a tier 1 villain to me.
Well, all that said by me, this is still, I think, the best Kennedy episode.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get into this episode, Mike. What's the name of the episode, Mike? Let's say that first.
Oh yeah, we didn't even name this thing. It's Dry Hard. Does someone want to tell me what that title's a parody of?
Is it? Only thing I could think of is Die Hard.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Everyone's favorite Christmas movie.
Okay, well, what's our production and air date order, Mike?
Okay, so it originally aired Wednesday, November 20th, 1991. This is an earlier one. This is actually 23rd in production order. I don't know why it's airing so late. I mean, I really wish it aired earlier to establish Liquidator faster, I don't know why it aired so late, but this is definitely one of the early ones. It's only 23rd in production order.
Mm-hmm.
So this week our story editor is Dwayne Capizzi. I want to point out something really interesting about him. Looking at all the episodes he was story editor on, we have to give him some credit for being behind the creation of the original Negaduck, Quackerjack, Stegmutt, the Liquidator, and the formation of the Fearsome Five. He was behind all those episodes.
Yeah, he got some good ones.
Yeah, he really, story edited on all the classics, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And the writers are Kevin Campbell and Brian Swenlin again. I pointed it out before. They wrote most of the Liquidator episodes. They wrote this one, Negaverse, and both Justice Ducks. They know this character.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of their early classics for sure. And animation, I've already mentioned them once. Someone tell me who animated this one.
Kennedy?
It's Kennedy. But I think this is their best one. There is some pretty poor animation, but that's true of all their episodes.
Mm-hmm.
There is one reason this one stands out, but it's better just to wait until we get to those scenes,
Okay. For me, there's certain scenes where I just did not like DW's facial expression, LP's dialogue not going well with his expressions. We'll get into that a little bit later.
Oh, there is one very infamous scene where Launchpad's dialogue doesn't match his expression at all.
Oh, that might be the scene I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we're talking about the same episode because it really caught my eye. I'm like, what the heck? His expression didn't even move with what he said.
Yeah.
All right, but let's go ahead and get into the episode. Tim, you still with us?
I am. I'm right here.
Okay, let's go ahead and get into your baby. We start off the episode. There's another hot scorcher day in St. Canard, and Drake is working on his yard plumbing. Take us away, Mike.
Can I just say really quick that I don't like the yellow sky in a lot of Darkwing episodes, but it really works to make this one feel hot. Mm-hmm. Like you really get this a heat wave. So Drake, is trying to fix his sprinkler system setup. Herb is master gardener here. His sprinkler system's incredible. Herb's a great plumber. Drake just wants to show him up. Mm-hmm. And as he's trying to fix the sprinkler system, he breaks off a little piece that rolls away and falls down a sewer grate. And a couple of construction workers tell him, it's the running joke, that he needs a 3/4 pinkney flange. Just a case of a funny word that's just funnier the more they say it.
Yeah. And
Tim, tell us what Goslin's doing.
Well, it's interesting because this whole episode, sort of thematically, it's really about too much capitalism is bad for everyone, and we shouldn't let it take advantage of us, or we'll all pay a price. And I think now, if you know what manufactured demand is, there's a lot of talk about that now. There has been in the last 10 years, especially regarding water, bottled water. And Goslin is basically, she's sort of outlining the what's going to be the plot for the villain. She's creating a false demand for bottled water with her little lemonade stall that she's got, it's really, everything here is set up so tightly because you've got those construction workers who come into it, and they're paid off right at their purpose for being there is paid off right at the end of the episode, and it's really, really like tightly set up, this whole opening.
That's true.
Yep. And I still think bottled water has like been the biggest scam ever, man.
But
definitely.
Goslin's even more shrewd though, because she's like dumping whole things of salt into her potato chips. The potato chips are free, the water isn't. And she's not even selling bottled water. Where is the water coming from, Tim?
Well, it's coming from the tap. And there was a thing actually at the time too. I mean, this is the thing you have to kind of, when you look back at this episode now, you have to remember at that time, bottled water meant something different to what it does now. Bottled water had been a thing kind of from the late 70s through the 80s with things like Perrier, where it was seen very much as a status symbol. It was it was something, a designer lifestyle, something that you've got to have. And a lot of people, if you Google, if you find lots of news articles from the time, from the 80s, bottled water is often referred to as this passing fad. that's ridiculous because people are paying for something that they could just get from the tap. They're being ripped off. And anyway, it sort of escalates that point later on in the episode. But that cynicism, her saying, bottled water, natural mineral water from the tap naturally, that's a comment on, that's something that was commented on at the time. So it's really reflecting it, the time in which it was made.
Yeah, because it's coming right out of the garden hose.
Yeah. So then we get Drake. He's still plumbing, and it backfires. His pipes are everywhere, Mike.
Yeah, it just becomes a gigantic mess, like a spider web of pipes. He's not good. He calls himself the original Mr. Fix-It, but he's not good at this.
Oh no, not at all.
And even Herb mentions he needs a 3/4 pinkney flange. Also, this is a very quick little bit between Herb and Drake as Drake goes in the house. There are scenes. I know a lot of the animation in this one is truly bad. I will agree with Will. But there's a handful of scenes in this one that were animated by one of my favorite animators, John McClanahan. I know I mentioned him in Whiffle While You Work on Quackerjack's first appearance. That's why that was so good. Here and there in this episode, he pops up enough that when I talked to him over a decade ago, he actually remembered he did this one because he did so much in it. So there's here and there, he does these scenes where if there's any good animation in this episode, it's probably his stuff. Okay. So there's a really quick bit between him and Herb. And then Drake goes inside, and Launchpad's watching TV. Does somebody want to tell us what is happening on television right now?
He's watching Soft Copy. Go ahead, Tim. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, yes, Soft Copy, which is a parody of a TV show from the time that started in 1989 called Hard Copy. And it was kind of an investigative journalism tabloid show. But what's funny is the music that they're playing sounds like something out of a Looney Tunes cartoon from the 50s. And the imagery, there's like a boot appears on the screen and stuff. And it's completely all not what that is, which is it's really quite amusing. I mean, if I go into what's happening on the TV, we've got a regular Darkwing character makes an appearance, and that is
Tom Lockjaw.
Yep, this is the first time they name his show, isn't it?
Yeah. In terms of the production date, this is one of his earliest appearances. Actually, his very first appearance is an episode that hasn't aired yet. So this is the earliest one that we actually see him in by production order. But he is voiced by Scott Bullock, even though this is an early one. So what's going on in St. Canard that he is reporting on, guys?
He's reporting musty water.
Yeah, and I was going to say the thing that's, again, this is building on what I'd said before about that time. I sort of mentioned it. Bottled water had been seen as this yuppie fad, and that you've got Tom Lockjaw who's standing outside of this building called La Grande Yuppie. I mean, it's not subtle at all. This is, and then you've got these two models, yuppie people, talking in Valley Girl accents, talking about Zinfandel. They were comparing this dirty water to Zinfandel, which at the time was a wine that was synonymous with yuppies. So you've got this dialogue that's going on for 30 seconds that a child's never going to understand what's going on. And I remember as a child watching this, I asked my mother, and she had to explain what a yuppie was and what Zinfandel was, and it meant something to her. But you get the gist of it. But it's really adult humor, and I've said this to Mike and yourself before, Will, as well. I think that Darkwing was really the start of the kind of post-Simpsons, kind of more edgy Disney content. And this certainly, this is sort of heavy evidence of that, because no way in even something like in Ducktales or Tailspin, you'd never divert away into this kind of stuff, So yeah, really, really quite edgy and topical stuff.
We have, by the way, the two women who are talking are voiced by, I believe, it's hard to go on because IMDb does not credit the actresses for these two characters. But we believe they're B.J. Ward and Darlene Carr. We've talked about B.J. Ward before. If our listeners remember, she was Gloria Swansong and the female Pat from Whiffle While You Work. Darlene Carr, super quick, born in 1950. I believe she's retired. This is the only Disney afternoon thing she's done. She seems to be most well known as a singing voice of the girl at the end of The Jungle Book. Otherwise, not much Disney stuff.
Okay.
That's really all I really need to say about that.
Right,
Yes.
right. And also just on the bottled water plot as well, I was just going to say, when this would have been developed, which would have been, in early 1990, I guess, when they were probably pitching the ideas for the show, there was an incident that happened that was it was reported on at the time nationally. And in the United States, Perrier, their entire stock had to be withdrawn because there were traces of benzene found in the water. So this was actually a massive coincidence. I asked Tad Stone about it, and he said, no, that had nothing to do. It's complete coincidence that happened. But it's just really interesting that you have these things that are in the air, So yeah, this was a really relevant episode.
So it's time to meet our villain,
Bud Flood.
Bud Flood. Okay. We have talked about Jack Angel before, a ways back in Justice Ducks. All I really want to say about him right now is that this man is turning 90 this year, and I believe he's still active. Isn't that amazing?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, I saw he went to a couple of conventions and stuff. He was still doing conventions, so.
I mean, anytime he wants to pack it in, no one's gonna blame him for it. I mean, he's had an amazing career, but props for Jack Angel.
Yeah. So what's going on with Bud Flood, Mike?
Well, Bud Flood is obviously a crook. He's talking about how there are germs that date back to the days of the dinosaur that are affecting water from some of his competitors. And he's made it clear, not his water, of course. His water is nice and clean, and you definitely should be drinking his water. Obviously, he's a crook. You can tell. He is not no innocent the way Bushroot and Megavolt were before their incidents. Also, really quick about him, he's got 2 spokesgirls who you never see who they are. They're always dressed up in costumes.
Yeah.
And in this scene, they're dressed as bottles of water.
They're great because they act as a kind of narrative Greek chorus for the Liquidator. And what's really weird is they're exclusive to this episode. They're never continued in any other. But and again, they're quite. I mean, this is also of its time. I mean, they're basically just objectified long women's legs. There's no personality there. But that's kind of how it's making fun of advertising and the idea of sex selling, and again quite edgy to have that in a Disney show.
Yeah, they're just pairs of legs sticking out of costumes, even if anatomically it makes no sense. So yeah, they mention, someone's befouling the water of St. Canard, and of course Drake's like, no one befouls the water of St. Canard. So he has to get to the bottom of this. Him and Launchpad.
Yep, they're on the case.
Time, Darkwing time.
Yep.
Launchpad gets a really stupid line. He goes, "It's hotter than a monkey's uncle." And Darkwing gives this look to the camera like, did he just say that?
Yep. And then where they end up at, Mike?
They want to get something to drink. And so they stop at the beverage hut. I forgot what it was called. And all of the water there has been contaminated except for 2 types.
Cuckoo fizzy water, right? Cuckoo fizzy water.
Do you think it's a subsidiary of Coca-Cola?
Yes.
and of course, Bud Flood, right?
Bud Flood's water. So one of those 2, Darkwing assumes, is going to be hit next.
And what's kind of fun as well is that the shop vendor, he's got like a little bow tie and stuff on. And even though, as I said, this is stuff that was very cutting edge in 1990, bottled water, like everyone's kind of dressed, even Bud Flood himself, they're dressed like they're out of a Looney Tunes cartoon from the 50s. They're very sort of classical. I also noticed as well, too, if you look, when you see the bottled waters, you see all those different competing brands, they're mostly glass bottles. Bud Flood is the only one that has single-use plastic bottles. And I'm sure that's a coincidence. I'm probably reading into it, but I like to think that somebody was thinking about that then, that they made the villain be the one who's got the plastic ones. I don't know. It's just an interesting detail. When I was rewatching recently, I thought, oh, that's interesting.
Possibility. So the first place Darkwing and Launchpad hit turns out to be the right place. They go over to the Cuckoo Fizzy Water Factory, and yeah, they catch Bud Flood in the act.
Yeah, he's contaminating it.
Really super quick, as he's contaminating it, he says, "Slop, slop, fizz, fizz." That's a play on the Alka-Seltzer jingle, "Plop, plop, fizz, fizz." Yes. There's a few of those things in this episode where they actually take real jingles and they twist them a bit.
Yeah.
Darkwing shows up. He gets an entrance.
And what is it?
I am the parking meter that expires while you shop. Were you going to say something, Tim?
I was just going to say that the pots that you see, the big vats with the clown faces on, they're incredibly Silver Age comics. They look like the Joker's mobile from the 1950s Silver Age comics.
Speaking of the Joker, and of course you're right, Tim, because Silver Age is what inspired Tad and everybody else writing for the show.
Absolutely.
But speaking of the Joker, what happens to Bud Flood?
Will?
Oh, I thought he was asking you.
Oh, right, sorry.
Anybody who wants to jump in.
Well, as you say, his dad he ends up falling to a fate that's similar to the Joker's into a vat. And before that happens as well, I just wanted to mention that you'll notice when you see Bud Flood doing his plop plop fizz fizz, he's kind of animated in shadow across his face and across his body. Darkwing and Launchpad aren't. And I think it's a really clever, it's a clever little device. And I think the whole thing is so beautifully art directed. It ends up, as you say, going into the into the world of Batman and the Joker.
Yeah, the 89 version specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And Darkwing goes to save him, sticks a broom into the contaminated water, and the tip of it gets all melted.
And it feels almost kind of callous, don't you think? The way that, I mean, because it's you've got Darkwing sort of he kind of like moves into Flood, and Flood, if you look at the physics of it, Flood walks backwards and then kind of topples over the banister and then falls into the vat. But the motivation for it is literally just Darkwing pointing to him. So he jumps back at that, and then he falls in. It's brilliant the way it's done, and the dialogue that Jim gives. You're going up the river, Mr. I forget the dialogue.
Mr. Taste Test, he says.
Yeah. The dialogue of it, and that the Foley that you get, the Foley sound effects of the feet clattering, sounds absolutely, it works really, really well. But then when he comes down, and you can see that he's melting, and he kind of. Well, somebody feels almost sort of callous. He sort of says, the cases are so much easier when the bad guy tops himself like that. And it's really meta, and quite dark.
A lot of those early Darkwing Duck episodes are a little bit dark and grotesque in their own ways. They kind of get away from villains dying in such grotesque ways. I mean, it's nothing compared to the next episode we're going to do next week. But still, he's melting alive in this vat of contaminated water. It's a little disturbing when you think about it.
Well, it's a living person dying, and it's that dark humor that you can access, and the way that it's kind of deflated with a joke. I mean, none of this would have ever happened in any of the kind of pre-Simpsons Disney shows, and I love it. I just think it's so brilliantly morbid. It's beautiful.
So we get we have the next scene. We're back at Drake's house, and we have a reporter from Better Than Your Home and Garden, which is a play on the magazine Better Homes and Garden. Obviously, he's interviewing Herb. Yeah, Herb has a great fountain, great sprinkler system. Herb knows what he's doing. Once again, Drake royally screws up. He turns on the water, and instead of the water coming out on the sprinkler system, it floods his entire house.
Mm-hmm. And we get that on the soundtrack as well. You get a version of what sounds like, the track Wipeout by the Safaris. There's like... They've composed a piece of music that sounds very close to that. Maybe it isn't. I don't know. But I was going to just say as well too, like this whole subplot that we've got here with the pinkney flange and with the fountain. It thematically fits in with the bottled water plot as well too, because it's sort of this idea of something that you don't need. This consumerism and having something that you don't even understand. He doesn't even know Jake doesn't even know what a pinkney flange is, and that's kind of the fun of it. And it's kind of the same way of it's like it's making a comment the same way as with the Yuppies with bottled water. You don't really need it, but you feel like you do because that's going to lift your designer lifestyle, and that's made furthermore so by having the reporter show up and make it a competition for gardens as well.
Yeah, this is when Drake finally decides he does want to get a hold of that flange, so they decide to go to the hardware store to pick one up. And that's when something comes out of the sewer, grabs Darkwing, and pulls him into the sewer.
Yep. It's somebody in a disguise, Mike. It's somebody in a disguise.
Yeah, someone wearing a trench coat and a hat.
Mm-hmm. But we see the two legs too, though, don't we?
Yeah. And he starts to introduce himself. Also, the singers are back wearing big boxes with question marks on them. What's going on here? Who could he be?
We get a little rendition of Glory, Glory, Hallelujah as well in the background too.
Yeah, they hum it.
And it's almost like Citizen Kane, isn't it? The presentation on the stage. It's not 90s marketing. Again, it sort of feels very classical, kind of American. As I say, it feels like something. It wouldn't be out of place in something like Citizen Kane.
So here's a great little morbid bit that I like. Bud Flood, we know it's Bud Flood by the voice, mentions to Darkwing that he pushed him in the vat of contaminated water. And Darkwing is not happy about that. He's like, pushed you, you fell in. We even tried to save you. And he pulls out the broom. He still has the broom with the melted tip. Like he's carrying this thing around for absolutely no reason.
Yep.
Okay, so he isn't really Bud Flood anymore. He is a new identity. Will, who is he now?
We got the Liquidator, finally.
I like how he reveals himself. This is also this shot here is also some John McClanahan animation. He throws his arms open and then he oozes out of the trench coat into a puddle in the floor and then forms back up into the Liquidator. Really good stuff. He gets a great entrance. Go ahead, Tim.
No, I was just going to say there's some absolutely beautiful animation in this of the Liquidator. And I mean, in terms of like what you were saying, all that kind of like that fluid kind of movement. And it reminds me very much of the Abyss, the water creature from the Abyss, obviously, and also Terminator 2, the T-1000 that came out this year. And this kind of like this abstract idea of shapes moving and twirling. And I love it when he grabs Darkwing and pulls him into the sewer and it does that weird twirl in his hand. It's absolutely amazing. It's really interesting to look at. It's beautiful imagery.
Well, I'm glad you like that animation, Tim, because I'm about to bust your bubble in about a minute.
There's a few moments coming up where it's like, they really should have done a better job with this.
Go ahead, Mike. Take us away.
Are you referring to the scene where Liquidator picks Darkwing up and throws him against a wall?
No, I'm not there yet.
When he hits the wall, it's like a 2-year-old drew it. Really bad. I mean, Kennedy had some good animators like John McClanahan and our friend Derek Bond, but they had some really bad ones. So what Liquidator does, this is another scene with some cool McClanahan animation, is he grows a wall of water around Darkwing and then heats it to boiling. And Darkwing's like, ooh, water. Ooh, I'm scared. He sticks his beak into it and scalds himself. And so the women come back and now they're dressed as lobsters. And I think we're leading up to the really, really, everyone talks about this. You're not the only one who's mentioned this, Will. Launchpad suddenly bursts into the room. And because Launchpad enters, the water comes down, Darkwing's okay, and the lobster women show up. And Launchpad screams, lobster women! But he's drawn so casual.
No facial expression whatsoever, man.
He like casually pulls his hair back as if he's just, no, he's screaming, but no expression whatsoever.
Oh, you got to rewatch that, Tim. You got to rewatch it, man. When he screams, like you would think he was like frightened or something, but his body is like just a normal posture, like he's just posting up somewhere.
No, I'll have to go. I've never noticed it when I've ever watched it. I was going to say just before that, when we have the bit where Darkwing says, "This duck's goose is cooked," and then we fade to black, and then we fade back up again, and you've got Liquidator. You'll notice at the left-hand side of the screen, inexplicably, there's a television camera that says LTV. And Liquidator's addressing that camera. And Darkwing's known for breaking the fourth wall and, frequently talking to camera and addressing the audience and stuff. But especially with a character who is media savvy and is in advertising, you think sometimes in this episode, I think, who are they looking at? Who are they looking at this point? Like where LTV, I guess that's Liquidator TV. Where is that being shown?
He addresses the audience a lot in this one.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Well, back to the episode. Liquidator, he takes off in the pipes, right, Mike?
Yeah, this is the last time we see the singers because they walk by in pipes too, and Darkwing tells them to get lost, and then they leave and you don't see them again.
Isn't that so weird though that they're never seen as accomplices? They're just seen as these mascots. You know,
they're funny, but I don't think I would have wanted to see them go the whole episode though. That would have gotten really old.
Mm-hmm.
So Liquidator, he escapes in the pipes.
Mm-hmm.
And, Darkwing still thinks he's great at plumbing, so he tries to reroute all the pipes and makes a complete mess of the waterworks, a complete maze of pipes. And he insists there isn't a leak in the joint. But yeah, Liquidator, he gets away. He slams Darkwing on the head with a water mallet.
Mm-hmm.
And Darkwing makes a comment, who would have thought fighting a watery villain would be so hard? And that gives the Liquidator an idea.
Yep.
What does he do, Tim?
Well, at that point, he has this weird ability where he touches water and he makes it hard. He makes it into a rubbery substance.
He has abilities in this one that he would never go back to ever again, and this is one of them.
Yeah.
And he not just rubbery, the water turns yellow.
Mm-hmm.
So all the water in St. Canard solidifies. We get some Muddlefoot action. We actually see Tank.
Yeah, he's trying to jump in the pool.
And he bounces right out.
The other thing as well, too, they do this 3 times in this episode. They do these stylized transitions. One of them is actually before when Liquidator goes up the pipe. You see they transition from Darkwing going underground to the waterworks. They have this wipe of water splashing across the screen. And then they do, I think similarly, they do the same thing for that transition to the montage where we see Goslin and the Muddlefoots. And Goslin's wearing a shell suit. Have you noticed that?
I didn't catch that.
Yeah, she's wearing a tracksuit. It's really weird.
There's a few episodes where they do interesting scene transitions like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like in Toys R Us when the axe slides past the camera as Goslin's in trouble at school. So he turns all the water solid. We see Herb doing the dishes, and then all the water in the sink solidifies. It's odd. His power affects water that's standing in pools and has no water source. So whatever his power is, it affects literally all water, not just water connected to pipes. Isn't it? Yeah, he can everything, pools and just standing water in sinks.
Yeah.
Darkwing and Launchpad fall into the bay, and it's the only water in town so far that isn't solid. And Darkwing goes, "We can drink the bay, nah, nah." Really funny drawings of his face. A little too wrinkly and strange, but I do like it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you know what, Mike?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Mike, I was just going to say, on that shot where he says, "We can drink the bay, nah, nah," what it does is this is a great piece of animation I like, 'cause it's very cinematic. But you've got Darkwing in the foreground, and the camera's focusing on him. And then as he's talking, you go out of focus on him, and you focus on Liquidator in the background, so that it creates that sense of depth, like really shallow depth. And I assumed the way that they animated that would have been with, the traditional Disney way with the multi-plane camera. And just to quickly explain what that is, that's where you've got several, rather than just having the characters on a flat background, you have several layers of backgrounds. So then you can have things like, the foreground, you can have things like, so say somebody walks through a forest or something, you can have the trees actually, perspective moving and that kind of thing. And I thought that's how they did it. And I asked Tad Stones, because I thought it might be done optically. It might be done with rephotographing and compositing on, and he said that's how they did do it. And the reason I noticed that is because there's a matte line slightly on Darkwing's face. So that's an optical.
You can't go in and out of focus if everything's on a flat level. Yeah, I don't see many cartoons doing that kind of thing, especially back then. You can probably do it easily now with digital.
Oh God, you could do it no problem on Photoshop, or on After Effects or whatever. But I mean, it was just amazing that they had that kind of technique, which you kind of associate with more with something like Roger Rabbit or something,
Mm-hmm. So Liquidator solidifies the entire bay, traps the boat, traps the fish, traps Darkwing and Launchpad up to their waists, and Liquidator does a little sales pitch as this act ends. He's now going to be selling his own bottle of water, which is the only thing left in town to drink, for the low price of $5,000 a bottle.
5
G's, yeah, right.
5 G's.
Yep.
And then it's funny.
All right, so then what happens? We got DW and Launchpad. They're in the bay. They're trying to get out, right, Mike?
Yeah, I think it's my favorite. From a comedic standpoint, this is my favorite scene in the episode. Yeah, Darkwing's narrating the fact that they're stuck, and Launchpad's trying to get out. He's pulling up, and suddenly Launchpad's bobbing up and down, like they're all stuck. So this one bit is my favorite bit. He pulls out what he calls a 200 horsepower thing cutter. It's just this giant motorized circular blade. He revs it up like a lawnmower, and the thing goes haywire, twists him up into a braid, and then zooms off. And as Darkwing watches it go, he goes, "Adios, thing cutter." It's really funny. It just even the way Jim just says "Adios, thing cutter." So
and
they
it's
have
pure.
to,
It's pure Chuck Jones as well, isn't it? It's Roadrunner essentially. The animation of it as it goes off into the background, and a lot of the artwork is very Maurice Noble inspired throughout Darkwing, but this especially seems very, very classic Warner Brothers. And I just wanted to comment quickly just on the we're saying about the whole thing, the drought that's there. And I think, really, when you've got this post-apocalyptic Saint Canard, it's amazing that the show starts with this kind of first world problem of Darkwing must superficially save these, save yuppies from their bottled water. Seems a bit silly. And then, and then at this point, it takes it up somewhere you'd never think that it would go, and it's literally about the most precious resource we've got in the world, and it's implied that it's a national, if not international, drought that's caused by this one villain. So it's crippling the whole world. And again, like this, and he's holding plastic bottled water, and I think it's incredibly prophetic and quite scary. But it takes on so much more weight than what it, initially it's just this guy who's doing industrial espionage and sabotage, and now it's turned into something where the whole humanity could be brought down because of corporate greed. It's really something.
All right. Well, we have to pick this up a little bit, Mike. So now we got Darkwing and Launchpad. They're moving up like a building or something. They're trying to break loose from the frozen. Well, it's not frozen. What
they had to pay someone to cut them out of it, but it's still stuck around their lower bodies. So they have to get out of this rubbery water they're stuck in. So they bounce up a fire escape up a 99-story building and jump off the roof. It works. It must have hurt, but it works. So they have to stop Liquidator, and Darkwing decides to, just do a little bit of an outfit change. He shows up at Liquidator's hideout. He gets a quick entrance. I am the hairball that clogs your drain. Oh, no, I am the soap scum that lines your bathtub. He does a bunch of them in this one. He comes in with like a neckerchief and a striped tank top and sandals, and Liquidator laughs at him because he reminds him of his cousin Morty. None of the girls would ever talk to him. So Darkwing threatens the Liquidator with a kitchen sponge. So Liquidator jumps down the bathtub drain. He goes, away goes Licky down the drain. That's the Roto-Rooter slogan. Away those troubles down the drain. It's the Roto-Rooter, the plumbing slogan. So they're battling Liquidator underground.
Was that a hot water heater where they try to trap him?
Yeah, they trapped him in the heater.
Okay, I didn't know. I didn't know what that was. It looked like a boiler or something. I was like, "Is that a boiler or a hot water heater?"
Darkwing is tightening a pipe, so Liquidator only has one way to go. So they trap him in the water heater, but the heater turns him to steam, and he escapes. But since now there's nothing in the furnace, it overheats and explodes. Really funny drawing of Darkwing, like this gigantic open mouth gasp when he realizes what's about to happen. And he finally admits he's a lousy plumber, and he gives up. He's not the original Mr. Fix-It. He's not good at what he does. So, Liquidator tries to make an exit, but where does he end up?
He ends up in the freezer.
Yeah. And he freezes solid.
But we see a new power from him, though.
He can create minions made of water. He can change temperatures, the molecular level of water, makes minions. He's got a lot of great powers here. And he comes out of the freezer, like he freezes solid. Darkwing mentions he doesn't like crushed ice. This isn't the first time he mentions he doesn't like crushed ice. And he crushes Liquidator into tiny little cubes. But suddenly the pipes burst. Liquidator comes back to normal and decides to bring all the water back, turn it watery again. And he uses a gigantic tidal wave to chase Launchpad and Darkwing all through the sewers.
Yeah.
So they find something laying on the ground in the sewer.
Tim, do you remember what it was?
It's the ultimate payoff. It's the pinkney flange from earlier, and and Launchpad points out, "Gee, a pinkney flange." And yeah,
Greek water too.
Yeah. So obviously he knows where they're at now.
Yes, they're right below the house, where Goslin, without any water, Goslin's business is suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And just as Goslin complains she needs some water flow, a gigantic torrent of water flies out of the manhole, throws Darkwing and Launchpad out of it too.
She's incredibly precocious, isn't she? A lot like Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes, who she's based on, talking about cash flow and stuff when she's 10 years old.
Mm-hmm. And then she tries to actually make Darkwing buy a glass of water from her. and because of that, Liquidator sees her and thinks, she would be good to have in my factory to like be enterprising with me to help me sell my water. And he instructs the minions to go after her. My assumption is he wants to mutate her too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's dark. He says, take her back to the factory.
Yeah.
So Goslin suddenly becomes a necessary character in the episode. Like, kind of last minute to really make a big deal out of her, but, you have to threaten Goslin to get Darkwing to really react.
Mm-hmm.
So we finally figure out how to stop Liquidator.
Yep. The payoff with the construction guys with the cement.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I love Darkwing gets on top of the cement mixer and goes, "Fat chance, Mr. Waterhead," and dumps the cement on top of him.
Yeah. And then finally, all the water is turned back. It's no longer dried. It's no longer dry hard.
Yeah, the little centerpiece Herb made with the dishes in the sink water, he puts it on the coffee table. It's the only time in the episode we see Binky. She doesn't talk, though. Mm-hmm. And when the water becomes liquid again, his centerpiece falls apart. And all the water is fine in town. The fish is okay. The boats can go. Everything's fine. And Liquidator is just a big cement statue now.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
It's really funny too. You mentioned about the Muddlefoots because that's so in character because they sort of represent the very kind of kitsch, suburban picket fence, Quackaware. They're very Pelican's Island, and that centerpiece. Even though it's for this episode, it just seems so Muddlefoot, doesn't it? It just seems the kind of thing that they would buy and they would have. And that fish, do you remember there's the fish, the sunbathing fish that we see in the bay? And the idea of in these shows where you've got the main characters are basically, instead of being humans, they're ducks and whatever in Disney tradition. The idea of having anthropomorphized kind of smaller animals that then look at the camera and talk. I mean, it's really funny, really clever. But I think that's really clever too, having the fish sunbathe. That's brilliant. It's so funny.
Okay,
so how do we finish this, Will?
All right, let's finish this let's go ahead and give our scores out. But before we give our scores,
we didn't do the very last scene.
Oh, okay, go for it.
Drake he finally gets recognized for his plumbing spectacular. The guy from the magazine comes back, and Goslin's like, "Yeah, you did a great job, Dad." And we discover what his masterpiece is. Liquidator is the fountain in the middle of his front lawn, and he's squirting water out of his mouth. And Drake says, "I couldn't have done it without my old friend, Licky." And that is how we end.
Okay. All right, so now that the dry hard is done, let's give our scores, our gas gun canisters. But we have two friends of ours that hang out with us on our Zoom chats every weekend, and they are big-time Liquidator fans. So I asked them to submit us their scoring of this episode. You guys, here it is.
Hey guys, it's Owen. I'd have to give this episode 4.5 gas gun canisters due to the fact that this is Liquidator's time to shine. He's not pushed to the corner in a Fearsome 5 episode. He really gets to showcase his powers and everything that comes with them. He's a really menacing foe for Mr. Fix-It, okay? But the animation is a bit off for me at times throughout the episode, but it doesn't drag me away from the overall action and story of this episode.
As far as Dry Hard as an episode, I would also give it 5 canisters. It is a little shaky sometimes with animation, but then there's some beautiful shots in there too. And it's written really well, and yeah, one of my favorite episodes.
Okay, so that's Tiffany and Owen scored. They're close friends of ours for this episode. Tim, how many gas gun canister are you going to give the episode? Don't rate the villain yet.
Oh, I could hundreds of gas canisters.
Hundreds?
Hey,
oh, man.
That's Will's shtick. to go over 5.
Okay, so you really love this episode, huh?
I think it's perfect. Yeah, I mean, it's delightfully cynical and funny and morbid, and it's pertinent now probably more than ever, and it opened up my young self to bigger ideas, and it's brilliant. That character, that villain is I'd love to know what Scrooge McDuck would think of him. I'd like to know what Milton Friedman would think of him. Actually, he's quite the character.
Mike, how many gas guns are you gonna give it?
I'm going to give the episode 3.5. I think it's strong. I think the animation tends to hurt it a little bit. But I do think this is probably the best score I've given a Kennedy episode. I'm not sure. 3.5 is definitely above average, though. I don't know if I'd go any higher, because this isn't one of my personal favorites, although I do think it's really good. How about you, Will?
I go 4.5. I really like this episode, the flow of it. Bud Flood to Liquidator, I love it, man. I think he's, as a villain, he's strong, man. I kind of hate how they bring him down, like just put cement on him or put pudding in him so far what we've seen, and he's easily defeated. I hate that, but he pushes Darkwing throughout all these episodes, man. He really does. And I like that. I'm kind of rating him. I shouldn't have done that right now, but for the episode, overall, I like it. I'm gonna stick with my score, man. I really like it. I think it's a tier 1. It doesn't get the perfect 5, Tim and Owen and Tiffany, because that animation to me is just so poor, man. It really hurts it. But guys, as I said, let's go ahead and score our villain now. But Owen and Tiffany also sent me their scores. Here it is.
Hey guys, it's Owen. For me, I'd have to give Liquidator 5 gas gun canisters. Simply because Bud Flood was already a greedy and menacing businessman, and his origin story is a little tragic. I mean, he didn't ask to be pushed into a vat of contaminated water. So, when he does get his powers are so great in that he can control water at a molecular level, he can change the temperature, and just the fact that he can control water makes him one of the most powerful villains of Darkwing Duck. He even gives Darkwing a run for his money most times. So yeah, it's no question for me. I'd give Liquidator 5 gas gun canisters, and he really puts the fearsome in fearsome 5.
Hi, my name is Tiffany, and considering Liquidator's my favorite villain, I'm definitely going to have to give him 5 canisters. Even though this is his only solo episode, it's a really, really good one, and if anything, him being in less episodes makes it so you always want to see more of him, and you're not sick of him like some of the other characters that they used a little too much.
All right, so we knew they were going to give them a perfect score. They love Liquidator. So, Tim, continue this pattern, man. What are you going to give Liquidator? What's his score?
The highest, 5. I mean, I there are issues outside, like in terms of establishing a character that can be used later on in the series. Mike had mentioned about the telekinesis and those kind of inconsistencies, and you just mentioned too about the pudding thing too. It's like there's a lot of stuff that's in here that once you've done it, you really can't go back from it. Once you've had him with concrete mixed into him, so he's stopped, you always know that's the way you can defeat him. So they kind of get out of it because the whole not having a continuity, not adhering to continuity within the Darkwing Duck universe is a thing. But I think I'm aware of the issues, but I give it full marks.
Okay, how about you, Mike?
I was going to give him a 3.5, but after watching this episode a couple of times and talking to you guys, I'm going to go up to a 4. But I can't really go too much higher because this episode presents him in such a very strong, fantastic way. But then pretty much all later episodes depower him so drastically. I mean, like I said, he can control the temperature, the molecular structure. He can make minions out of it. He can transform his body into different things. But in later episodes, he's defeated by getting stuck in a bottle, or a net drops on him, or Jello, or he's so depowered. In this one, he can have a conversation with Darkwing. He's not trapped in that ad speak. Like, he can actually talk and discuss things. In later episodes, he has no real personality outside of the jingles and the ad speak. And I feel like he becomes a much lesser character in all those later episodes, where here, I wish they would have done more with him in this.
Do you know what? It's because it's anchored on Bud Flood. That's what does it, because you've seen that transformation, and he gets worse, and he's getting worse, and he's basically taking over the whole world's water system, turning it into hard water. And as you said, that isn't earned in any of the other episodes. That isn't there, so he becomes a gimmick.
Yeah, I'm gonna give him a 4 also, Mike. That was my original score. I'm sticking with it because I definitely feel this episode just shows the strength of him, and it's a great origin story, man. I love it. It's a great episode for him. You know, it shows his strength, his powers, and all that. But like you said, I guess I could think ahead, and he's defeated so easily, and it just kind of messes him up, and he's never done justice again. Like he doesn't get a solo episode again after this, right? This is it.
No, and the best of Liquidator is honestly behind us.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he was great in Justice Ducks. They had him up against Neptunia, and he took over his portion of the city.
A great battle.
We see him a couple more times in 2 other episodes where he's really depowered, and he's not much of a character. They could have done more with him, but they're kind of an autopilot with him now because they have to stick him with the Fearsome Five, and that's all he's going to be, a member of that group. You know, right. I will say one thing. Every member of the Fearsome Five has gotten a 5 from somebody, except for poor Bushroot.
Yeah,
I feel.
I think Jim Peterson would have gave him a 5. But so Mike, that's Dry Hard. What episode do we have next?
Okay, yeah, you don't like animation, Will? Get ready for this one. We got Heavy Mental. The episode was what I think has the hands down worst animation in any Darkwing Duck episode. It has its moments. Mm-hmm. It's super morbid, this one. So it's fascinating. I can't wait to talk about it, but it'll be an interesting discussion. So Heavy Mental is next. Our one of only 2 or 3 big Launchpad episodes, honestly. So that's next week. Heavy Mental.
Okay, and for the people who are listening to us for the first time, Mike, where can they find us?
We're everywhere. I can't believe all the podcast apps we're on. Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, iTunes, Pocket Cast, Radio Public. Speaking to Amazon Echo, she'll talk to you. You know, she'll play the newest episode there. iHeartRadio and Pandora. And watch us on YouTube. Please watch us on YouTube, because it's not just the episodes that we do. It's videos, it's commercials, it's that incredible virtual panel. If you guys have not watched that yet, please, please, please watch it. And yeah, we're all over the place. And of course, join our communities. The St. Canard Files, the Darkwing Duck podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
All right. And the only shout out I got this time, Mike, is to me. Finally got that virtual panel out.
Again, if you guys haven't watched it yet, stop, let this end, go right to YouTube, budget 2 hours of your day and just watch the thing. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and then and one more last shout out is to all the Liquidator fans and our guest co-host with us today, Tim Partidge. Here's your shout out, man. So thank you for joining us today, and guys, remember, stay dangerous.
Stay dangerous, guys. Good night.
Night.